Yeah, I'm not doing too much shooting.
Okay, guys, so we're going to get back at it really quickly. Can you do me a favor? Thanks. So what?
Why would she ever do that for you?
Okay, so this actually is being recorded now. You're actually going to be seeing my screen. The next bit of work that we're doing, though, is on the whiteboard, so you will not see this. To pick back up where we left off, we were actually dealing with scratch disks. We'd already gone through performance and talked about bumping up the amount of RAM that you could use, your 50 states of history. As we move on to scratch disks right now, we did talk about what a scratch disk does. And again, just to show you again on the whiteboard, the whole trick to scratch disking is this, is that the electronic memory in your computer can only hold so many versions of your image. Once you exceed that number, it starts writing those versions back to your hard drive to store them as long as Photoshop is open. As you start going back and forth between these two, this traffic back and forth, traveling from your hard disk into your RAM, whatever, this amount of time is dependent on how fast your hard drive is. So, in most cases, if you are working on a laptop, you're at a serious disadvantage. How many people in here are working on laptops? That's pretty much your primary thing. Most people are, so I just need to talk to you about what's really going on there. Most laptops that, and when we talk about a hard drive, I'm going to turn this whiteboard around now to show you basically what a hard drive looks like. Again, it's pretty much exactly like a CD. It's a platter. In a lot of cases, it's a series of platters. It's a stack that looks almost like a stack of pancakes. And there's a little arm that moves across the top of that, and it just, all it does is read the pattern. If you were to really look at what a magnetic dot looks like on a hard drive platter, basically there's tracks that go around this hard drive. And inside those tracks, so a track actually looks like this, and I'm not going to draw it all the way around, but you guys get the idea here. It's broken up into things called sectors, and they're just little tidbits of this. And inside every one of those sectors, there is a pattern of black spaces and non-black spaces. So what happens is, like an area here will be black, and then an area here will be black, and then the rest of it will be white. And then the pattern varies depending on what your data is supposed to be. Does that make sense? And so this arm zooms across this, pretty much like a record album, like the needle on a record album goes back and forth. And what the arm does is it's got a laser on it that shines onto this platter. And wherever there's a black spot, none of the light comes back. Wherever there's a not black spot, it's actually really shiny and light comes back. And so that's how the hard disk recognizes the pattern, right? Well, so there's a number of things that can affect how quick this happens. And the first and most important is rotation speed. How fast does this thing spin? Every hard drive that is shipped with a Macintosh laptop has a hard drive in it that spins at 5,400 RPM. That means it turns around, it rotates around 5,400 times in 1 minute. Does that make sense? That's how fast it is. You can get hard drives though, and it's what everybody who does this work professionally does. They pull this hard drive out and you buy another one that actually spins at 7,200 RPM, which is a 50% boost in your scratch disk speed right off the bat. You just swap the hard drive, but it spins much faster. Does that make sense? So because it's spinning faster, the hard drive, the arm going across, can read it faster, and it can get the data to your electronic memory and RAM faster, and the whole reading and writing back and forth goes faster. Does that make sense? Okay, you can actually buy, they're very expensive, but you can buy 10,000 RPM hard drives. Also, incredibly fast. Again, speeds up your Photoshop work. Is that important to you? Well, of course it is. The faster you can do a job. If you can charge the same price for something that it takes you 10 minutes to do, that it takes somebody else an hour to do, you're charging the same price, you're making 6 times the amount of money that they are. Make sense? It doesn't end here though, and this is a tricky one. So I'm going to try to do this as an illustration, a practical illustration. I'm going to turn on the light here. So like I say, this is a complicated one to get, but hopefully you guys will actually understand this part. So I'm going to take my official cord here, and I'm going to measure the outside of this hard drive. Does that make sense what's going on? So here. I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to trace the outside of this just to see how much distance is around the outside of that. Does that make sense to everybody what I'm doing? Okay. So this is how long the outside of that hard drive is. Does that make sense? I just traced it, right? So I'm going to put this on this cord right here. And what you can see is that it's about 1.5 feet longer than the entire width of this board, right? So it went from here, all the way to over here. Does that make, it's about that, right? That makes sense? So I'm going to measure that. This is my trusty digital web ruler. This is a 42, who makes a 42-inch ruler? Jesus. This is a 42 inches to here. So to here is 42 inches, and out to about here, it was out to about like here, right? That seems about right to you guys. It's another 12 inches, so that would be 42 plus 12 is 44, is 54 inches. So it's 54 inches around the outside of this guy. Does that make sense what I just did? Anybody not get that one? Okay, there's another circle here in the middle, right here. I'm going to do the exact same thing right here. This is just another track. It's just much closer to the middle. It's that long. Does that make sense? Okay, so well, I actually can do this up on the board right here. I'm going to do it to right here. And measure it. It's 13 inches. So the area around this guy is 13 inches. The area around the outside guy is 54 inches. Who does not get this?
What are you trying to explain?
Just the distance.
Distance around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? So it's 54 inches to go all. If you were a little ant and you were running around this guy, you would run around and take 50. It's 54 inches. That's how far you'd have to go. If you were the same little ant going around this guy, it's only 13 inches around, right? Okay, so this hard drive is going to spin. I'm going to put a mark right here and another mark right here. This does 1 revolution, right? Well, when it starts, this point's right here, this point right here, it starts and it travels, it turns around, whatever, and by the time it gets back here, this point's back here and this point's back here as well, right? I mean, it's a hard drive, it just spins, right? What you have to realize, though, is that because the distance out here is so much further than the distance here, the hard drive out here is spinning much, much faster. How much faster? Well, who's got their calculator really handy? Can somebody divide 54 by 13?
4.1538.
We'll just call it 4 times. The outside of this hard drive is traveling 4 times faster than the inside right here. What is 4 times faster? Well, 2 times is a 100% increase. 4 times is a 400% increase. The area on the outside of this hard drive is traveling 400 times faster. Not 400 times, 400% faster than the inside of this guy. Does that matter to you? Well, of course. What happens if you made this area right here, this whole part of right here, what if this was your scratch disk? That's your scratch. The slow area in here is, this is where you put your calendar. That's where you put your email. You don't care how fast your fucking email is. Do you? No, but you care how fast your scratch disk is, right? So what people do is they actually partition hard drives. What you do is you take a single hard drive, looks just like this, and you can essentially make it appear as if it is more than 1 hard drive, that it's 2 or 3 or 4 hard drives. And does that make sense? And I'm going to show you how to do a quick partition right here. I'll show you. I've already got one that's my hard drive inside of my computer has been partitioned. And when you look at my hard drive, it's called boot drive right here. It's this boot drive and then this data MD. This thing has been partitioned using disk utility software. In order to actually do this kind of stuff, you take a blank hard drive, you open up disk utility, you click on partition, and then you click on, this is, well, here, I gotta do it. I'll do it to my external hard drive, which is not connected. Oh, no, I take that back. This is a different hard drive. Okay, you would actually simply come up and you would say, I want to do 2 partitions. And then this top partitioning, the way partitioning software always works is it works from the outside in. So this first partition right up here is the very outside of my drive. It's the stuff that's really, really, really fast. So I would call this first guy right here, Scratch. And in terms of the size of a Scratch disk, most people say that you need a minimum of 60 gigabytes. Everybody will tell you you don't need more than 120. If you're using more than 120, you're working with way too big of files and way too many history states. And if you set it to like 500 like it is right now, it's just you're throwing away space. It's wasted. You're not getting any advantage out of it. You're never going to go that high. So at any rate, I would set this at 120. And then you'll see that it'll shift, and the rest of this you could put down here, and you could call this applications and data, or applications and storage. And then you simply hit apply. Now, I'm not going to apply that because it'll ruin my hard drive setup here. But this is basically all you do. Once this happens, you end up with what looks like 2 partitions on your, 2 completely separate hard drives on your laptop. So you'll notice in mine, I've got my boot one is divided into 2, and I've got another one, but one of these partitions is invisible right now. But you'll see what the boot one actually looks like. So I am not going to do this. And you'll see what ends up happening is when you look at my desktop, you'll see I've got what is called a boot hard drive right here and a data. These are actually 2 pieces of the very same hard drive. The boot one would have been my Scratch one, the first one, traveling at 4 times the speed of the inside of this. Does that make sense what's going on here? Yes.
Is it benefiting because it's covering more surface area?
It's because the outside of the drive is spinning faster than the inside. The outside of the platter is moving faster than the inside.
So
because it's moving faster, it can read data faster, and it can write it faster. So this exchange, back and forth from hard drive to RAM, this whole back and forth happens 4 times faster just by putting your Scratch disk on the outside. Didn't cost you a penny. 4 times speed increase. Photoshop is 4 times more responsive. I don't know. Sounds like a good thing to me. Especially that it didn't cost me any part. Yes.
When you make the partition, does making the first part, the Scratch part, is that what puts it on the outside?
Exactly. They're all made from the outside in. So you don't need it. You're not just limited to 2. You can do up to 16 partitions using this utility software. And you can actually do, and every one that you add, as you start going up in number, or graphically, it starts to move from the top down. You're moving from the outside of the disk towards the center. Yes?
What's it called? Stuff you use.
The one that the software that I just used is Disk Utility. It's a part of Apple. So if you go to your application folder, it comes with every single Apple there is. And I don't know what the partitioning software is for PC, but I know it exists. If you're really dying to do this, let me know, and we'll figure it out. Anyway, if you go to the applications folder, all the way down to the bottom in utilities, there it sits right here. It's Disk Utility, and it's with every single one. It's where you partition all this stuff.
So you do it to your external drives?
Okay, so this is a great thing. This is another question that comes up all the time. The fastest hard drives in the world are the ones that are inside your computer box. The minute you go outside and you have to connect a cable, you kill your speed massively. And it doesn't matter whether you're using Thunderbolt, USB 3, it does not matter. The only thing you can use on the outside of your box is a very special connection called eSATA. But again, no, you want to do this on the internal drive, and internal drive, yes.
you partition your internal, is it gonna make you, are you gonna lose everything?
Everything. So here's the trick. If this is something you decide that you want to do, because I've had a number of students actually want to do this, you need to get in touch with me first and we will do it together. Because what you basically have to do is you end up cloning your Macintosh hard drive onto an external. You boot from that external, meaning you turn on your machine from that external. You erase your internal hard drive, which is a very nerve-wracking thing for people to do. You repartition the internal while your external is still controlling everything. Once it's partitioned, then you clone all the shit that was on that external back to your internal. It's the only way to do it. Okay. Okay, so there's one last thing in all of this scratch disking that matters, and it's this. You do not always have to have mechanical drives like this. There is a thing now called SSD, which stands for solid state drive. And basically what a solid state drive is, it's a box that you connect to, and this box is full of nothing but these RAM chips. So it's just RAM chip after RAM chip after RAM chip. It's all electronic. The only difference in the RAM on your SSD and the stuff on the inside here is that when you unplug this SSD, all of your files stay, you don't lose the memory. If you've got a file that you're working on in Photoshop that's on, and it's loaded up into Photoshop and you're working away on it and somebody yanks the cord out of your computer and turns it off, all the work that you've done in here will be lost. The stuff on your hard drive won't be lost, but the stuff here will be lost because this is volatile. Solid state memory, that the RAM that's in an SSD is not volatile. It actually remembers stuff. You can unplug it and all of your files stay in there. But this is extremely fast, and there's no moving parts in this, so there's no reason to partition these. There's no middle, there's no outside, there's nothing that spins. It's all electronic. The only downside of this is it's expensive. Make sense? Okay, so finally, back to this, guys. We're getting through this, I swear. We are going to do something in this class tonight. In the scratch disk part right here, what happens in this, so I need everybody to open up the scratch disk preference. So again, up to Photoshop, down to preferences, down to scratch disks. This is where you assign scratch disks that are made. Now, in your case, what you should be looking at, you should only see one single partition there, and it's probably called Macintosh HD, right? Isn't that what they're calling the boots on these?
The name of the class.
Oh, it's got the name of the class. So you're, I don't know, you're 1000-E or whatever you are. That's the name of your hard drive on this computer. If you were to partition things, like I've got mine partitioned right here, you can actually activate different partitions. So, and you simply activate them by clicking on these check boxes. But more importantly, once you activate it, you can change the order. So let's say instead of this thing being called Data MP, this was my new scratch disk. I just built this guy. This was my scratch disk. This was my Macintosh HD. This is where all my applications are. This guy is blank right here. You click on it to activate it. Then you click on the entire thing to make it active. And then you change the order. So you would click on this up arrow because you want your scratch disk to fill up first before it starts using your other partitions as scratch disks. Because you went to all the trouble to make this guy the fast one, you need to now tell Photoshop not only make it, you need to activate it, but you also need to make it the first thing that we go to. Does that make sense? And then finally, and here's the rub, and it's the big rub of all. Once you do all of this, you have to quit Photoshop and restart it for this to work. Once you do that, it'll remain sticky and it'll work forever. But you're reading, writing in Photoshop, you have a chance now for your history states to be on the order of 4 or 5 times faster. If you throw a solid state in here instead of your regular spinning hard drive, everything is screamingly fast. Make sense? Are there questions about this? Again, guys, this is all about performance, and if that's not what you signed up for in part of this, then we're all in trouble. Okay, I'm going to cancel out of this because I do not want to do that to mine. A couple of last preferences that we need to check here. In terms of cursors, this is an important one right here. By default, I think it's set up as standard. You want to use the normal brush tip, and you want to show the crosshairs in the end of the brush tip. It makes your cursor look like this. Some people feel like you should use the full-size brush tip. That is a mistake. And the reason it's a mistake is this. If you have a soft brush in Photoshop, the hardness is down. It's a really soft brush. It's got really soft, fuzzy edges, right? That brush should look different to you than a completely hard one, right? One that's completely solid, right? If you select this one right here that says full brush tip, they look identical. What the full brush tip does is that the circle is any part of the brush having any effect at all. And the fact is, on a soft brush tip, by the time you get to those very edges, you can barely tell that the brush is working at all. So it's very deceiving. Everybody use that, you'll feel like your brushes are way too big. Nobody uses it. In terms of the other cursors right now, you need to change this from standard to precise. And because it's, again, nobody works with a little paint bucket for the fill thing. Nobody works with you try to get rid of all of that kind of stuff. You can leave the brush preview color where it is. In transparency and gamut, by default, just gamut warning is set as a middle gray in Photoshop. You do not want that to be a middle gray. It's the hardest thing in the world to see. If you want something to show you a warning about a problem you've got in Photoshop, what is the gamut warning on yours? It is, these have all been set by, according to what I've asked them to set it. What most people will do, if you want to change the color of this warning, you simply click on it. You get a color picker that comes up. If you type in a 255 green, you'll get this like neon green. It's to show you warning areas. And again, by default, it does a 50% gray that you can never see, so you don't want that part to exist like that. Units and rulers, this is not as precise as it actually could be. By default, the screen resolution, and this is a long carryover, this is a carryover from Photoshop back in ages and ages ago. Most people, and it's probably on these screens right here, they put it into as 72 ppi, right? They haven't been 72 ppi in decades. So the way you find out what a one really is, and we'll do this on your machine right here, is you do this. I need everybody to stand up and look at this and watch what I'm doing. So the first thing you do is you measure the true width of your screen, and I am getting 22 1/8 inches, which is 22.125. Make sure that's right. Now this is kind of esoteric, but again, if you really want your machines to work, I take it back, it's 23, let's call it 23.5. So you're not measuring edge of the screen, you're measuring the edge of the actual image. Does that make sense? So I'm not going from here to here, I'm going from where the image is right here to where the image ends right there. Makes sense? So it's just the actual image part, the width, right? So I get 23.5. And then you go to the Apple menu, down to System Preferences, and you click on Displays, and you click on Scaled so that you get the real value of what's showing up here. And these fuckers do not show you the scaling. Okay, there's another place to find it. Instead of going there, come up to the Apple menu, come down to About This Macintosh, and a screen will open up, and under Displays, it will give you the displays in pixels, and you can see, in this case, it calls it built-in Retina display. It's 5,120 pixels by 2,880 pixels. Does that make sense? So the width of this is 5,120 pixels. 5,120 pixels. That's the entire width. It's also 23.5 inches. Can somebody whip out their calculator really quickly for me and divide 5,120 pixels by 23.5?
217.87.
217.87?
Yes.
So then that is the number that you would put in here. You would change this screen resolution to what was it, 208?
217.87.
You would put that number into your screen resolution. Does that make sense? So in my case, I've done this exact same thing. I don't have as high-res a monitor as this, but in mine actually measures out. My screen resolution here is actually a true 146.289 pixels per inch. Again, how many pixels wide and how many inches is it? You simply divide the number of pixels by how many inches wide and you get the true screen resolution. When that happens, you can then actually get your screen to show you 100% to a 100% print. So if you click on 100% on your image in Photoshop, it will actually be the size of whatever your print ultimately is set up to be. The two will be the same. Does that make sense? If you don't want to go down this road, you don't have to. There's a gazillion people in the world who've never touched this, and they'll be just fine. And the rest of this you can leave exactly the way it is, and you say, okay. I'm going to cancel out of mine just in case I've changed something I don't want to change. So all of this part is working out pretty well. Did everybody get on the sign-in sheet? Okay. One last thing that we need to set in Photoshop, and this is absolutely, absolutely, absolutely critical, and it is this. Under the Edit menu, you need to come down to Color Settings, and you need to tell me what you see in that top little space. What's your first line under Color Settings? Do you have one? North American Prepress 2, which is exactly what you do want. By default, this is what happens. Photoshop, by default, Adobe does this. They use North American General Purpose 2. Do not mix those up. In General Purpose 2, it's using a working space, and we'll get into what working spaces are a little bit later, but it's a working space of sRGB, which is a very small color space compared to Adobe RGB, which is our preferred color space. So that is wrong. Down in color management policies, it will preserve your embedded profiles. However, if there's any mismatching or missing, it will not tell you that those things are missing or mismatched. It will simply jam the shit together. The real tragedy of this is that because you are not getting any warnings here that there's a mismatch, the minute you save your file, if you didn't know this was going on, you could take a perfectly good file that you had been working on your whole life in Adobe RGB and actually save it into Adobe sRGB, which would throw away about 1/3 of its color, and there's no way to recover. There's no way to undo it. You have thrown that shit away and rewritten the file, and you don't know you've done it. So if you are working on computers like this, if you are bringing in your files and working on these computers, if you do not check this every single time, you run the risk of really fucking up your file.
So you want which one?
So the easiest one that is set up correctly is not this North American General Purpose 2, which is the default, tragically, but it's this one right down here, North American Prepress 2. And you will see that in doing that, it sets your RGB working space to Adobe RGB, which is our preferred working space. It also preserves all the profiles, but it also checks all of these so that if you open up a file that is in, say, ProPhoto RGB or sRGB and whatever, and there's a mismatch between your working program or not, these things warn you. A dialog box comes up and says, you are getting ready to do this. Are you sure you want to do that? And then you'll know, because we're going to talk about working spaces at least some point tonight or tomorrow, next week. Make sense? Are we good on this? Okay, let me check one last thing here, guys. So that's it as far as that part goes. Really quickly, I want to show you something about your Wacom tablet. So did everybody get a Wacom tablet and hopefully has plugged it in? And I may have to go back to one of the class computers because this is my 4th or 5th Wacom tablet, and I never know if this is going to work for me or not. So I know the tablet will work, but I'm not sure the preferences will show up. And if they don't, I'm going to have to, again, it's not going to, you won't see it on the recording, but you'll hear the voice part of it. So with your Wacom tablet actually plugged in, if you take your stylus, or actually look at your stylus here, your stylus actually has 3 parts to it. Let me turn on this light. It's got 3 parts to it. It's supposed to be like a pen. That's the metaphor for this. It's supposed to look like a pen. On one end, you've got a stylus. That's the positive end. They call it the stylus end, whatever. That's actually a positive part. So you use this to be your brush or your cursor or anything like that. You use that to be that part. On the flip side of it is the eraser, and that's actually the negative part of it. So you would use the stylus part to say you picked a paintbrush. You would use it to paint. And then you could flip it over and use the eraser to erase the paint that you just did. Pretty simple. Makes pretty sense. There is a rocker switch on some of these. Some of these are missing the rocker switch. It's not a big loss. I never use the stylus that I have and doesn't have a rocker switch. It doesn't really matter. This rocker switch is a button that can be used to work exactly like a mouse. You can actually set up how this whole thing works. Those are the parts. Does that make sense? So if you want to configure your Wacom tablet, you come up to the Apple menu, down to System Preferences, and down at the bottom you should have a thing that says Wacom. And if you click on that, it should open up. And I'll see again. I don't think mine is actually going to. You what? I don't know.
It's Wacom tablet.
It's Wacom tablet. Well, if you click on one, you'll see one won't do anything and the other one will. It's just because the other one is set up for a different kind of tablet. That's what I was saying. Every single tablet has got its own driver. So if you had 10 tablets, there'd be 10 of those fuckers in there. Yeah, it really drives you absolutely nuts. Okay, so my tablet will work, but I can't show you the setup. So I'm going to go back. So again, on the video, you're not going to see this, but you will hear it. So a lot of people say, why do I ever have to show up to class and just, I'll just watch the videos? That's a really bad idea. Okay, and let me put my tablet in here. Okay, so up to the Apple menu, down to System Preferences, down to Wacom Tablet, and this opens up. And this is where you can configure your tablet. So they started out with the right design. In theory, you should have had if you had multiple tablets, you should have all of them sitting up here, but those never worked. This thing never worked on Photoshop, on Wacom's part. They never actually figured this out. However, this is an Intuos 4 tablet. Then if you click down here under the tools part right here, this will allow you to control the functions. Again, the difference in this, some tablets have this, some don't. Some tablets actually have a mouse that goes with it instead of just the pen. You would actually select which tool you wanted to configure here. In this case, they don't, so it doesn't matter. In terms of applications, we're going to set this tablet up so that it works for all applications, but you could conceivably say, I want it to work in Photoshop one way, but I want it to work in InDesign in a different way. If you wanted that to happen, you would simply add an application here, and you could just pick, okay, I'm going to pick Photoshop, and I'll configure it for Photoshop one way. Then you could click Safari and figure it another way. Most people do not do any of that. They simply leave it for the entire, just so that it works universally. You will notice on this tablet, if you can see here in the dark, that there's one side of it that's actually got a series of buttons and what they call a touch ring. You can configure those to do different things. Those configurations sit right here, so you can see for this button number 1, it's set for settings right now, but if you click on this drop-down menu, you can make it do anything.
It doesn't drop down. What did you say?
Oh, see, this is completely different. Mine has actually got the wheel. Yours doesn't. This actually may be the wrong Wacom tablet. Close that guy off. Do go to System Preferences again and try picking the other one. Let's see what happens. Oh, well, then stick with the pen. In which case, again, some of these drivers, this is the nightmare that is Wacom. That's all I can tell you. And if the Wacom people are listening to this, fuck you. Get this shit together. You're the only goddamn pen tablet company in the whole fucking world, and you can't come up with one universal goddamn driver? Are you nuts? This is a nightmare. We all hate you for this. Yes. Oh, you do have both. All right, so click on functions. You've got, it looks different. On their case, they've actually got functions, and then they've got a grip pin over here, which means my grip pin probably won't work on this, but we'll see. Oh, nope, there's my grip pin. Once you get it close enough, it actually comes open on it. So at any rate, that's what these guys are up here. So I've clicked on functions. All I'm trying to tell you is that you can change all of the settings here so that these buttons do different things for you. I don't have this on my tablet, so I don't use them. If you want to use this, great. Have at it. Just know that you can change them to do anything. So if you want this button up here to be, say, like the back button, then you can set it that way. The scroll up or down button, you can set any of these to do anything that you want them to do. The touch ring allows you to actually control how this touch ring in the center works. Again, I don't ever use this guy, so if you want to use it, great. Now you know what it is. The grip pin is the one thing that I do want you to actually look at, because this guy does make a difference. If you look at the pen section in the beginning with, this will actually is going to configure the stylus part of it. In the first part, tip feel, what you've got is if you take your stylus again, the pointy end, and you actually push it down on your tablet, you will actually see a pressure gauge that comes up that gives you some idea of what it takes to get to a maximum reading. How stiff is that really? How much pressure do I have to put to really get down there? You could, if you feel like that is too much pressure, you can actually drop this down so that it takes much less pressure. So I've just set my tip feel to the softer. If you feel like you want more control, but you really want to have to jam on this thing to get it down, you can actually set it up to firm. I'm suggesting to everybody in this room, please, if you don't have years and years of experience with a Wacom tablet, leave all of this at its defaults. The double click distance on this, what this means is that you can actually take your stylus and tap it twice really quickly. How fast does it then need to be before, you know how you can double click on a file and the file will launch? How fast does that need to be for it to realize that you are double clicking as opposed to just dropping your mouse down twice? That's what this double click distance is right here. Again, I would suggest you leave this at its default. Then these buttons right here, the drop down menus right here, these deal with that rocker switch. On the back of the rocker switch, the one that's closest, the one that's the top, the one that's closest to the eraser part of it is by default set to be a double click. And then the one that's on the bottom closest to the stylus by default is set to be a right click. Again, you can use these. Some people, that's great. Some people don't use these at all. That part doesn't matter. Tilt sensitivity. These things have gotten incredibly sophisticated now. You can actually use the tilt of your stylus to control things. So for instance, when you're painting in Photoshop, all of you guys are at least, you're very close to 3s or above. There's a couple of 2.978 guys. But how many in here know that brushes have opacity? Everybody, right? Well, you can set an opacity adjustment to be the tilt of your brush, so that the more you have your brush back here, say the more ink it puts down, you're closer to 100%. But the more you would push it forward, you could use it to drop your opacity. You can use it to change flow. You can use it to change brush size. So you can set tilt to do all sorts of things, right? In my experience, again, walk before you run. I have all this shit turned off on mine. I have all of it turned off. I work with a stylist every single day. I work with a pad every day. I don't use any of this shit. But I'm just telling you guys that's what it is. If you go to the next one over is the eraser. This simply tells you the same thing. Does the back button on this, the opposite side of your stylus, function as an eraser? You can actually change what it functions as. You can have it again in your drop down. You can have it change so that it does these possible options, so that it is a right click or a middle click, or that it will open stuff, or that whatever. You can actually disable it, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, most people leave it as the eraser. It too has a pressure control on it so that you can change again. And by simply taping pushing the eraser down, you can get a visual sense for the feel of it. One of the things that I can tell you that happens to everybody when they first start working with these things, the two things that'll happen to you that'll fuck you up. The first is that you actually are using the wrong end. You are wanting to use the stylus to paint with a brush stroke, and it's not working, and that's because you've got it upside down and you're working with the eraser and you don't have anything to erase. That's the first mistake most people make. The second mistake other people make is they actually leave well, you'll see it happen right here. They leave their pen sitting on the tablet, and then they go back to try to work with their mouse. And all of a sudden, look what's happening to my mouse. I get near stuff, and it starts taking off all on its own. I mean, I'm just trying to get it over. I'm trying to bring it down to the lower left-hand corner, and you'll see it goes all over the place. It's because you're sending two signals. The pen is sitting on the tablet, and it's sending a signal to it. Does that make sense? So it's just the two classic ones that screw everybody up. And then finally, mapping, and this question already came up here before as far as this part goes. Where this really matters, or where it's important to this, is mapping is when you get into multiple screens. You can actually have a 2 or 3 monitor setup, and let's say you put your image on one screen, but your tools all on another screen. you can actually say you want your tablet only to function on your image, so you can remap where it goes. You could also, in the case of like Photoshop, you can see in my screen right here, it's actually a relatively small area that I could work on. You can actually go in and remap to just the corners of where your image would be so that that becomes the full size of your tablet. There is no reason for people in Photoshop to do this. There is a reason for people who are doing, for people who do like computer illustration, they're like painting. There is a reason to remap your tablet to a different area of screen if you're actually a painter, because you want to be able to do broad brush strokes that would actually indicate you're going from the bottom of your painting to the top of your painting, that kind of thing. In Photoshop, we primarily work on extremely small, dedicated areas, so there's no need to do this remapping part. You're working on such a small, restricted area, it's simply easier to move your image around than it is to try to do this remapping part. As far as the people who are left-handed or right-handed, it's set up to have the express keys on the left, which means my tablet, like this, the keys are on the left-hand side, and when I take my mouse, the stylus point, and I put it on the top edge like this, it's the top left edge, it's actually on the top edge of left of my screen. If you are a lefty and you want to spin that, you flip it around like this, but now so that you have it on the, you can put it on the left side of your computer screen so that, again, the keys are closest to your computer. When you do that, you need to change this so that the express keys are on the right, because you're turning your tablet upside down. So what I'm all saying is that if you get your tablet set up, oh, here, you'll see. I'm going to get my tablet set up, and I'm going to put my cursor, the stylus, on the top left-hand corner, and you'll see it's in the bottom right-hand corner of my screen. It's because my tablet is upside down. So simply spin it the other way. But if you want your stylus keys, if you want those express keys to flip so that they're closer to your computer, this is where you change it, is this guy right here. Just put these to the right. Oh, and you can do that as well, yes. But it's just easier to just turn it around. And like I say, I ignore all this shit anyway, so it doesn't matter to me. But anyway, all you really care about is that, although I had somebody in this class once, for years they had been doing this tablet upside down and backwards. And they did it really well, but they were so used to it, I was like, really? And they were really good. They could draw arcs upside down and backwards, and it would arc on the, it was so bizarre, but that's it. They said, well, this is how I learned, and go for it if it works. But yeah, anyway, yeah.
Is there a way to make the proportions different so that, or is that just?
Yes, you can control all of that. So for instance, you can come in here in the mapping part, especially instead of doing a full screen, you can do a portion of the screen. This thing will come up and you can actually drag these things to do a different part. You can actually click on this to define a screen, which will allow you to come up and select points of your screen so that you can actually do that. You can get really, really, really super precise about this stuff. And then again, this is really designed to do with multiple monitors. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All I can say is that if you're not used to working with a mouse, a tablet, leave it at its defaults. It's not quite training wheels, but it's not the fixed pedal either. Okay, are we good?
Yeah, I figured it out.
Okay.
It was bothering me how fast it was tracking.
Okay, other questions about this? Okay, Versa, for Christ's sake, can we please, please, please do something? I am bored, I'm hot, I'm tired. It's my first day, third day, fifth day back, whatever. Let's actually do something. So let's actually do something. Okay, so if you look on, if you did not copy that stuff to your hard drive, at the very least, look on, let me trade my monitor back. Look inside the assignment folders that I gave you guys that's on our partition. You need to go to class 1. Inside that class 1, there will be a Photoshop file called Beard. And you need to open that guy up into Photoshop. You guys find it? All right, so did everybody get this guy? Anybody not get this? Okay, so what we're gonna start out with, if you take a look at this, it's a picture of a guy. Oh, by the way, this is a complete ripoff. There is a website called Phlern, P-H-L-E-R-N. It's run for the most part by a guy by the name of Aaron Nace. This is his tutorial. Like I say, this is a complete ripoff of this, but it's a really brilliant one. He actually taught here for one semester. He taught this class for one semester. He's a very sweet guy. So at any rate, all credit goes to him. If you don't want to watch the video here of me going through this, that's fine. You can actually go to Phlern. I think this is a free tutorial. A lot of his stuff goes free, and then some of it stays free, and some of it doesn't. But at any rate, if you want to go down that road, please, please, please contact me. I'll be more than happy to point you to it. He's really good at this. But I want to go through this process with you guys because what I'm really trying, one of the takeaways from this is the idea that you not only can you make custom brushes, but you can make serious custom brushes. So that's what we're going to do on this guy right here. So the idea or the purpose of this is that there's areas of this guy that, again, hang on one second. There's areas of this guy's beard that have holes in it. And if you want to actually fill these guys in, you could actually conceivably go in here with a brush and you could create each one of these small little hairs, whatever, which will take you forever and it's an absolute nightmare to do. So we're going to actually generate a brush to help you do this kind of stuff. How many people in this room build their own brushes? Yes, we are doing the tablet for this guy. I have 2 people over here who build their own brushes. Anybody else? 3? Okay. So this is going to be an Uber build-a-brush sort of exercise, just to give you guys some idea of the possibilities in all of this. So what I want you to do is actually zoom into this area. It's this blank area of this guy's. It's on the right side of his right side of the image, lower part of his mustache part right here. If you come into this area right here, and you'll actually see, and this is something you're going to run into all the time. Oh, and are you guys working in the retouching space? So we should talk about workspaces here really quickly before we get too much further in here. If you click on this drop-down menu and you come down to do workspace, do me a favor. I want you to change this really quickly. Come down to workspace and come down to essentials defaults and let go. And you'll see that your screen goes really wild. It may not look exactly like mine, but it goes pretty wild. This is what mine looked like the last time I was actually using defaults. When you are going between workspaces, workspace is a 2-step process. It's not a single step. The first step is that you actually select the workspace that you wanted to do, which is what I just did. However, the second step, you go right back to the very same place, up to window, down to workspace, come down to reset. And this name will change to whatever workspace you just changed it to. So when you click on reset essentials, this will actually bring it back so that it looks like the original Photoshop looked like when it shipped. If you want to go back to my retouching space, again, you come up to window, down to workspace, and in your case, you would pick the retouching workspace, let go. It will change this up somewhat. However, when you do that again, 2-step process, back up to Windows, down to workspace, reset the retouching workspace, because otherwise these windows, the palettes in here are sticky, and if you've moved one around, it'll stay where it is, so it will not be what you expect it to be. It will not really be the default. Yes?
So you want us to reset the retouching?
I do. So retouching is what I want, and I want you to go ahead and select reset it really quickly. And then finally, as you come up here like this, the image is really big, and actually in order to move around inside this image, I run into a problem. I've got to move the entire frame to do it, or I've got to get to the scroll bars in order to do that. I don't really work this way a whole lot, and so a lot of times we're gonna do this. It's a little bit more advanced than I necessarily wanted to get to tonight, but I'm gonna show it to you guys anyway. If you come over here, you've got to move your image out of the way now because it's actually hiding part of my toolbars over here. If you've got your toolbar actually showing here, let me get back to the hand. If you double click on the hand icon really quick, it will make your image as large, as tall as it can be, and still be able to see the entire image in the screen. If you double click on the magnifying glass, it will actually bring your image up to 100%. What I'm going to suggest you do is double click on the hand It drops it back down to its 100% here, and then move it so that it's slightly centered in your screen like this. Is everybody good on this? Then I want you to hit the F key once. The F key is actually called the pasteboard, and what you'll see has now happened is the little stoplights have gone away. You don't have the closed box or the shrink box or the green box that makes it bigger. That's actually all gone away. If you hold down the space bar, you temporarily get the hand. You can now move the entire image around. You're not restricted by scroll bars. If you keep the space bar down and you add the command key, which is just to the left of it, your tool, no matter what tool you have, will temporarily turn into the magnifying glass, which will allow you to click and zoom into whatever area that you click on. Yep, I'm holding down the space bar and the command key, the one just to the left, and you temporarily get the magnifying glass. If you add the option key to that, you get the negative magnifying glass. So no matter what tool you have, so for instance, hit the B key, that's the key for a brush. If again, you hold down the space bar, the brush temporarily becomes the hand. If you add the command key, you get the magnifying glass. And if you add the option key, you get the negative magnifying glass. These are the primary navigation tools that you're going to use throughout the entire class. So at any rate, with the space bar down on the palette, working on with the F key down, getting to the artist palette here to work on this, whatever, you don't have scroll bars anymore. But even more important is this. If you hit the B key again to get a brush, you'll notice that as you move your brush out away from the image to the outside, it remains the tool. That does not happen in a regular situation. So for instance, hit the F key again, you go to what they call the black pasteboard. It has no tools, and then hit F key again, and you go back to the original image. It's got the little stoplights at the top. Do you guys have rulers showing by any chance? We always work with rulers, so you might as well get used to it right now. Come up to the view menu, down to rulers, and just have that check mark on. At any rate, with your brush tool selected now, again the B key or the S key to get the clone stamp tool, it doesn't matter. You'll see that the minute you bring that tool off, it becomes the mouse and the cursor again. That's not a great way to work. Let's say you want to do some really fine edge work over here with just the soft edge of a really large brush. Well, the minute you bring your brush over here to the side, it stops being the brush. It starts to become the mouse again. If you hit the F key once, you go to the pasteboard. And again, in the pasteboard now, I can use, I'm going to do a different brush. I'm going to go back to a regular just round brush and make it really big. Sorry, make it really big. And you can see my brush is completely outside this image. It's sitting over here on the side. So you can do incredibly finesse work on this image on the outside. You're not just restricted to the end. So we're going to use the pasteboard throughout this whole class. But nonetheless, zoom into this area. Again, I'm just holding down the space bar and the command key to zoom into this. And I've given you a single whisker, but we're going to try to make our own. So there, if you look at your layers palette, oh, and just a quick just rundown of where we're at right here. You've got properties that are sitting up here at the top. You've got layers and paths that are right here. On this side over here, on the other side, you've got the info palette. Then you've got history and actions, and then final channels at the bottom. Keeping all of these visible is incredibly important for us, and so that's kind of what we've got going on here. In your layers palette, if you've got, there's path down here in layers palette, I want you to click on the layers palette to make it active. You have actually got the image, that's the guy with the beard, but then you've also got just a single whisker that's up here that I've actually made for you. I want you to turn off that single whisker so that it's not visible, and I want you to add a completely new blank layer to that. Now, there's a number of ways of adding layers to this. You can come up to the layer menu and come down and do new and actually add layer. Or you can simply use these icons at the bottom, which is primarily what we're going to do throughout this whole class. I use these guys right down here at the bottom. you've got on the very right-hand side, you've got the garbage can, which is where you throw away layers. Right next to it is how you can create a new layer. Right next to it is how you create a new group. A group is simply a holder for a series of layers. So you could say, for instance, if you were doing all of your skin retouching on 3 or 4 layers, you could put it into this one folder so that you could then turn off the visibility or of all of those layers in one fell stroke. It's just an organizing tool. Next to it is the adjustment tool, so the adjustment layer. So this is where you can put curves on and that kind of stuff. You guys probably know all this. Next to this is actually where you add layer masks. Next to it is style layers, and then next to it is locking of multiple layers. But in our case, we simply want to add a blank new layer on top of this. So I'm simply going to click on the add new layer icon once, and it puts up a blank new layer. Hit the B key to come up to get a brush. In the brush palette, and we're going to do this a gazillion times, guys, the minute you change any tool in this class, your eyes should jump right up to the top of this screen, right up here. This is the option palette that sits right up here, and this is where all the options for tools are controlled. This thing is dynamic to the tool. So for instance, if I change this to, say, the eyedropper tool, you will see that the options up here change. This is all dependent on the tool that you've actually picked. So again, I'm going to go back to the B key to select a brush. However, brushes, if you'll see right here in your tool palette right here, the brush tool has been highlighted. The reason it's shadowed right here is it's supposed to look like a button that has been pressed. It doesn't look like that at all to me, but that's the way the people, Adobe people must be on the best fucking drugs in the world, because they make all of this shit too small for anybody to be able to see anything. And then they think, oh, that looks like a button that's been pressed. And I'm thinking, have you guys ever heard of a drop shadow? Have you ever heard of a highlight? Have you ever heard of 3 dimensions? You guys fucking invented 3 dimension in a graphic world, and you're too stupid to put it in on your UI. You think I rail on the Wacom people. The Adobe people, if I ever had a chance, never mind. So at any rate, with this, you need to check to make sure that indeed it is the brush tool. So if you click on the little bottom right triangle of that brush palette, the lower right-hand side, you will get a flyout menu. You need to make sure you have the brush tool, not the pencil tool, not the color replacement tool, and not the mixer brush tool, but the brush tool. And again, this is just, you need to get in the habit of doing this stuff, because if you make mistakes with this, then it's just going to cost you time. Time is money, and there you go. So with that being said, this part is actually set up correctly. We are then going to click on this drop-down menu. This is a menu that we will go to over and over and over and over again. In my case, I've scrolled to the top of it. You can see that there's a scroll bar right down here that's got all sorts of different brush shapes and sizes in here. If you scroll to the top, you should have 6 that go across the top that look like little circles. Is that working for you? No. Yeah, so just perfect. I got right there. So you've got these 6 guys that are sitting across the top. Okay, so that's all you want. So what is the difference in all these 6? These are the 6 major ones that I want you to work with. So the one on the very left, if you click on it, it sets the hardness of your brush to 0, which means you have a very soft edge brush. It looks just like the illustration. It also turns off all the pressure control of your tablet. So no matter how hard you press on this tablet, nothing will change. You won't get a change in opacity. You don't get a change in brush size. You don't get any changes at all. The one right to the right of that, if you click on it, it gives you a 100% hard brush, which is a completely hard edge brush. That's all that you've got. There is no softness to it at all. Those are the only 2 brushes I want you guys to use this entire class as far as the top 6 go. And this is why. The next one over, if you click on this, if you hover over this, it's hard to get the readout to actually come on this guy. Sometimes you actually hover over it. Sometimes it doesn't come on. It doesn't want to come on. It looks like the very same thing is happening here in terms of it's actually changing hardness to softness. But what this is also doing is this is an enabling brush pressure. And I don't remember the exact order of these, but one of these controls the size of your brush and the other controls opacity. Well, I can find out right now, so we'll just see right here really quick. It says size, the first one? Okay, so what this will do is it's a very soft brush. The harder you press, the bigger your brush becomes. The lighter you press, the smaller it becomes. If you don't know that's what's going on, this will drive you out of your fucking mind. Do not use this. Do not turn that on. And then the next two over is the same thing. It's a softness and a hardness, and this controls opacity. So the harder you push on your brush, the more opaque the ink you lay down. The lighter your brush, the softer, the less amount of ink you actually lay down. My suggestion, again, for anybody starting to work with these, use these first two guys only and nothing else as far as this part goes. Make sense? Finally, there's a little tool up here. There's two things up here right next to this, and you'll see this again. To get out of this menu right here, because you've got a drop-down menu right now. So for instance, if you wanted to go in and try to change opacity, oh, that's nice. It actually drops out right now. When this tool is down, you do not want to then come over on your image and actually drop a point to get this fly-down menu to go away, because you'll actually lay down a brush mark if you do that. So to get rid of the menu without affecting your image at all, you simply click in this area near the options bar up here at the top. So again, look at my screen really quick. Instead of clicking on my image, which will actually put ink down on my image, you simply click up here next to this, in this blank area up here, and that fly-out menu goes away. To get it back, click on this. I want you to drag the size of your brush down to like 6 pixels. There's different controls here that you can do this with. You can actually use the slider like this. You can also type the value in directly. So if you select this, you could actually type in a 6 for pixel. If you do that, then I also want you to change the hardness. Now in our hardness changing, we go from 0 hardness, which is very soft brush, to 100% hard brush, which is very hard brush. In our case, you can actually do it in the middle too by simply dragging this slider. So if you drag this slider down to around a 65, 70, somewhere in that area, this will give you a relatively hard brush. It'll have a little bit of a softer edge, but it won't be completely hard like a 100% hard brush will be. Does that make sense to everybody so far? Okay, great. Again, to get out of this fly-out menu without doing anything, click out of this area in this top area right here. In your case, you may have default colors, foreground and background colors. That is these two colors right here. To set these foreground and background colors at their default, which is black and white, you can either click on this little bitty icon that's right next to it. Nobody does that. If you go for an interview and somebody says, can you reset the default colors, foreground and background colors, and you click on this icon, they will say, thank you very much for coming in. You may leave now. Nobody uses this shit. To get to the default colors, you simply hit the D key. There's no modifier, no nothing else. The D key gives you the default colors of black and white. To swap these colors, because you always, no matter what you are painting with, it's always, you always paint with the foreground color. So in my case, black is my foreground color. If I wanted to paint with white, I need to flip these two. I need to switch them. That's what this little double-headed arrow is for. If you click on that little double-headed arrow, the two colors invert, and you get white as your foreground color now. This is the second thing that if you do on a job interview, they see you do. They will also say, thank you very much for coming in. You can leave now. Nobody uses this shit. To invert back and forth between these two colors, you use the X key. So the X key simply inverts those two. The D key will default those colors. Those are the two. I am not a huge shortcut key guy. Again, why would I not be a shortcut key guy? It's memory. I've already told you guys, I don't have a good memory. I don't remember command key shortcuts. They don't mean, there's nothing logical to them about that for me. Yes, can I remember D is default? Yeah, I can remember that. Can I remember X is like, somehow I can see those lines like flipping, and so somehow in my mind, I can remember that part of it, but that is so much work for me. So I'm not the command shift R plus minus colon guy that will make your image invert, turn around, and become 3D all on its own and earn you $1 million. I'm not that guy. So you can be those people though. So if you want, I'm fine with that. So anyway, I've got black as my default color now. I've got an empty layer to actually work on. There's a couple of last things that we need to check on this. So if you come up to the window menu and you come down to the brush all of the menus that we're looking at, all these are called palettes. All the palettes that we look at, their visibility is controlled with this window drop-down menu. The one that I want you to pick is the one called brush. Now, by default, it's going to come up brush, but you're also going to get a brush preset menu here as well. It just does this by default. I'll show you how to modify workspaces next week. But the thing I want to make sure that you've actually got on this guy is we've got the regular brush has been set up here, but there's a couple of changes that we need to actually make on this guy. So I don't know what you need to select on the brush palette. Sorry. On the brush palette, you need to make sure that smoothing box is checked. And then on transfer, you need to click on that. If you look at the bottom of this, you will get a preview of what these selections are actually doing to your brush stroke. And the reason I've actually got this set on transfer to like this is if you actually I've clicked transfer. However, to set the transfer options, you actually need to click on the word that says transfer. In that, I want you to make sure that your opacity jitter is set to 0, that your flow jitter is set to 0, that your control, though, is set to pin pressure. If this is set to off, you look what happens to your line. Your line starts full and ends full. If you change this from that control in this drop down to pin pressure, what happens now is that when you make a brush stroke, as you start to end your stroke, your stylus naturally will come off your tablet and it will give you a sharp line at the edge of it. Does that make sense? So let's look at it. I'll show you both of them. So go ahead and take pin pressure off so that this looks just solid. Again, make sure that you're working on that extra layer that we added. Black is my foreground color, and simply come up somewhere on this guy's face and draw a line. And it looks like that. And you can see that the line starts heavy and ends heavy. If you hit Command Z, you will undo that. And now change your flow jitter to pin pressure. And now when you come over and do that same stroke, you'll see that at the end of the stroke, it begins to fade and sharpen. And that is because of this transfer has now been set by pin pressure, which makes it look more like the hairs on this guy's face. Wouldn't you guys agree? So then the trick to doing this now, what I need you to do when it's set up the way it is I need you to create one single hair. So I just did this one here. It does not look like this guy's hair. So Command Z to undo it and try to do it again. If you like it, keep it. If you don't like it, Command Z. Try to do another one. If you like it, keep it. If not, Command Z. What you're trying to do is to get one that actually looks like a hair. It's incredibly hard to do. If, however, you're not happy with it, if you're doing this over and over and over again and you're getting frustrated with this, there's a cheat, and this does not show up on Aaron's video, but I'm going to show it to you now. I'm going to hit Command Z to get rid of this guy. I'm going to simply do a straight line down like that. Yes? Okay. That's exactly what I wanted you to do. Stop me.
Oh, figured it out.
Okay, figured it out. You good too?
Yeah.
Okay, good. We still need to change that control. So drag this palette out of the way, and then change your control fade down to pin pressure. And then you'll see that this faded ends. That's what you want. Okay, so if you feel like you sort of got it kind of where you would maybe like it a little bit, you don't like the top edge of this. You don't like this very top part, this part. Look at my screen right here. You don't like this guy right here. Turn your stylus upside down to get the eraser tool and simply erase the top part that you didn't like. Turn your stylus back around to the stylus part now. You can transform this guy. So to transform it, we're going to hit M to get the marquee tool. If you can't remember that, it's the selection tool. It's the rectangular marquee tool. The reason I use this is because if you simply go in and do a transform, it will want to transform the entire area of the image, the entire image. You're only trying to transform this little whisker. So you have much more control if you select it first. So I'm simply going to then select the whisker. I'm simply putting a small rectangle around this mark right here. Then you're going to transform it. The transform tools we get into in a big way in this class, but we're not going to tonight. So suffice it to say that it's up under the edit menu. If you come up to the edit menu, you can come down to transform. The shortcut for that is Command T. that will actually bring up the transform dialog box. However, bringing up this transform dialog box really only lets you do sort of scaling issues. You can do rotation issues. You can do that kind of stuff. What I'm interested in doing is actually warping this guy. To get to the warp tool, you can come up to the edit menu down to under transform and go to warp. Or it's this little icon, again, up here in the image. These options now have changed because I'm in the transform tool. It's this little one. This thing always looks like a shopping cart to me. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you've got the transform dialog box, but first you need to make a, oh, there you go. It's this little guy right here. But you need to zoom in too because you're way too zoomed out. You need to be able to see what you're really doing here. If you click on the thing that looks like a little shopping cart, you get the warping tool, and you'll see what the warping tool does. It puts it's this little tool right up here that looks like a shopping cart. Or it's under edit menu down to transform warp at the very bottom. It's a menu item as well. Once you get there, you'll see you get this grid around your image. And this grid has got movable handles. So you can see, for instance, you can grab handles and actually warp the way this hair is supposed to look. So I'm trying to get the hair to actually look more bent and curved like the hairs on his face. So I'm simply warping this grid that's on top to sort of get that guy to curve a little bit more. Is this working for you guys? Are we good on this? So, and then just hit the enter key. You can actually hit the plus. There's a little check box up here. You can hit that guy, or simply hit the return key. You've still got an active selection going. The shortcut to kill an active selection is Command D. That gets rid of the selection. And this is what my hair actually looks like. Now, if you feel like the hair is still a little bit too big, there's no reason that you can't transform it again. Again, Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. You can actually crush this down. You can make it a little bit skinnier. The trick, the whole thing that I'm trying to say to you guys is that once you get this thing going, you can actually modify it so that it becomes a little bit more. Because believe me, you can sit there with a brush and try to do that brush stroke to make a hair for an hour and not be happy with it. Not a good call. Okay, so if you don't want to do this guy, you can actually use the single whisker that I gave you. If you turn it on, you'll see it looks somewhat similar. So we can use either one of these. That part doesn't really matter. So pick one. I'm going to actually go with my new one just to see how it works here. So I'm going to throw my other whisker away. So our next step in this is that we need to turn this into a custom brush. In order to do this, select the background layer first, because what I need to do is I need to put a white background underneath this single hair that we've actually got going. So in order to do that, I'm going to select my background first. Then I'm going to add a blank new layer on top of that. So right now, and we should get into the habit of naming these. So if you double click on the name on the very top, this is going to be your single whisker. So just double click on the name and type it in. That's fine. And then on this layer 2, you can leave it as layer 2 because we're only going to use it's a temporary layer. We're going to get rid of it in just a second. So with layer 2 active, and you need to make sure when you named it layer single whisker, it made that layer active. You need to go back now to your layer number 2 to make it active. You know it is active because it is highlighted. Unfortunately, in later versions of Photoshop, they made this highlighting gray. This used to be a really light teal, not a light teal, but a very deep teal blue kind of thing. It was easier to spot. But I think, again, they were worried about color contamination, so that's why this has been made to gray right now. With this actually selected like this is, we need to go, again, back to the marquee tool to make a selection. So it's the M key, or simply come up to the second keyboard tool, select rectangular marquee tool, and want you to come and select and drag a rectangle out underneath this. Now, in a perfect world, this marquee tool would be square. I have not let go of my marquee tool now. I'm still holding my stylus down. If you add the shift key, it will actually make it square. However, I also want it to be centered. I want the hair to be centered into the middle of this. If you want to move the selection while you're still holding the mouse down, add the space bar. That will allow you to, so right now I'm holding both the shift key and the space bar to get it square and to also get it centered. And then simply lift your mouse up off the trackpad and you will have a square selection going on underneath this. If it isn't perfect, don't worry. It's just, but we're going to get into making selections and all that kind of stuff. So you just need to know that part. Okay, so we've got the marquee tool selected. That part's good. And then, so don't let go of those guys. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine. Did that work for you? So lift your mouse up off before you let go of the keys. You're still good. All right, is everybody good on this? Okay. Again, hit the D key only, no modifier, the D key to make sure that your default colors are black and white. To fill with your foreground color, this, again, I'm giving you most of the keyboard shortcuts that I know tonight. So I told you I don't use any of these, but some of these I do use, so it just makes life easier. To fill with your foreground color. Now, black happens to be my foreground color, but if it was red, I would be filling this thing with red. To fill with your foreground color, you hold down the Option key and hit Delete. To fill with your background color, you hold down the Command key and hit Delete. Now, if you look at your keyboard and you look at the space bar, you will see that the Command key and the Option key are right next to each other. The Option key is always left of the Command key. The foreground color is always left of the background color. These are key dependent. So for instance, right now, black is my foreground color. If I hold down the Option key and hit Delete, it fills it with black. However, if I hit the X key only, I flip my foreground background colors. Now when I hold down the same Option key and hit Delete, I fill with white. Option Delete is not a black or white thing. Option Delete is always foreground. Command Delete is always background, no matter what those colors are. So if my foreground color was red, Option Delete would fill this thing with red. If my background color was cyan, Command Delete would fill it with cyan. Are we good on this so far? Okay, everybody's this far? Okay, here comes the magic. Up to the Edit menu, down to Define Brush Preset. And a dialog box will open up and it'll actually show you a little preview of your brush. And you need to type in a name of your brush, and you want to call this facial hair or whisker or whatever you want to call it. Or in my case, fascist hair. That works for me. I'm going to do fascist hair 4 because I've got so many of these hair brushes you can't imagine it. At any rate, if you do that, go ahead and then say OK. And you have now just made your brush. And although it doesn't maybe look like it right now, if again on this layer number 2, hit Command D to deselect, because otherwise this thing can only work here in this space right here. If you bring your, I'm going to hit X again to get black as my foreground color so that I can actually paint with it. And then I'm going to come over to this area that's just to the side of the guy. It's still on the background, but just to the side of this guy's face. And I'm going to click, and I'm sorry. Command D. I'm going to hit the B key to get my brush, and you'll see that your brush looks just like the thing you just made, doesn't it? And if you click once, you just put down a hair. And if you click again, you just put down another hair. Who is this not working for? Okay. Wow. That's, yeah, it sure is. Okay.
It's a state and a spirit.
Apparently it is, right? Hit Command D to deselect. Hit the B key. Okay, no, that's all right. That's okay. That's all right. Don't worry about it. Let's go back to this here. Let's do this. Turn this layer on and off for me. Let me just see 1 second real quick. Turn it back on. And then turn this guy on. And then off.
I think what I did was I hadn't covered it in white yet.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. We're just going to do it again. So hold down the Command key and click on this layer 1. Just click on that icon. Yeah. So this is now loaded. So then come up and let's do another brush preset. So Edit menu, down to Define Brush Preset. Call it facial hair. In your case, facial hair 2, because you probably already have 1. And say okay. Command D to deselect. B key looks just like that guy. So again, and if black is your foreground color, click once on that and you'll see you put down, looks like that. So, but what a drag would it be to actually sit here and do this like this? Oh, I'm going to do this all over, right? You'll also notice if you click and drag that that's what your brush ends up actually, the line that your brush ends up making. So in our case, this is the good beginning of this, but we actually need to modify this brush to actually do something with it. So in our case, the brush has been made. You don't need to worry about any of this more. You can throw both of these layers away. The brush has actually been made. You don't need to worry about that part anymore. I am going to then hold down the space bar to move my image over here, so I've got some area to work with right here. I am going to add a blank new layer so that I can see a preview about what's actually going on. We are now going to modify this brush in a big way to actually give it something that'll be a little bit easier for us to actually work with. So the first thing we're going to do, you need to go back to your brush palette. Up here at the very top, you need to click on Shape Dynamics. And remember, this is a preview of what your brush is actually going to look like. You need to click on the checkbox next to Shape Dynamics, but then in order to control Shape Dynamics, you need to click on the name. Yeah, we just deleted it, but if you did, just drag that out of the trash. The whole. Yeah, because actually you can actually go back in history to scroll up to the top. We can go back in history because you've made your brush. So go all the way up and just click on it, and then click and get rid of that single whisker layer. That's it. And then click on Add New Layer, and you'll be good. Yeah. Oh, you don't need to point anymore. Your brush has been made. That's all you cared about. Okay, hit the B key. And click on the point there, you can see what it looks like. You're actually painting like this, so click the X key to paint black. Click on your, yeah, you do not have a brush there. Okay, no, we'll get there. We'll get there really quick. Click on single whisker and make it visible. Good. Go this guy away. No, not that guy. Top line. So like that. Hit the N key. Actually, click on background. Click on new layer. Perfect. Yeah, the N key, and then simply drag your triangle out underneath this top.
No, now that might not be.
And click on space bar. So that's okay. Yeah, I need to deselect. Command D. You can start a little bit more. Not perfect. Okay. Yeah, fine, just like that. Hold it, and then hold on space bar. So keeping that down. With whole selection up a little bit, that way a little bit, like a perfect. That's good. And then we're going to fill this with white. So in your case, it's going to be Command Delete. Okay. And then up to image. Edit. Down to define brush preset. All that facial hair. Perfect. Whisker works great. Hit the D key for brush. Hit the Command D to get rid of that selection. Good. And then bring your brush, bring your cursor up here. This could be a Photoshop problem here because that's not the way that brush should be made. I'm saving my version of this really quick to the server, open my version. So close that guy up and open my version, we'll have it. Yeah. So let's step back in time. So go back just in history one at a time. Let's just see what happens. Go back. We never got a white rectangle. I'll keep going. Yeah, just keep walking back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to do the same thing. So for anybody who's having issues with this, I'm saving my version of this. Oh, fuck, I can't get it on the server. Hang on. And Julie, send me a quick email telling me what number that machine is, please, so that we can have it looked at really quick.
I know, but it looks like a man. It's just the hardness of how
So for anybody who's having trouble with this, there's now a copy of Beard on the server that has got, fuck, it's not gonna have my brush. Let me see. That didn't help you guys at all. It's not gonna have the brush. It doesn't matter, because we're 5 minutes away from having to, well, we're 2 minutes away from having to stop this class anyway. So now would be a good time to stop. So let's do this. Let's regroup. Do me a favor. Look through the video part. It's this last part as far as we've actually seen it. For those of you who are having trouble with this, see if you cannot create that facial brush, okay? I'll bring a copy of, the problem is that I can give you the file. What I can't give you, the brushes are actually not kept with the file. Brushes are kept in the system. So you need to get this. You need to create it on the machine that you're on. You can't do it. I can give you the things to make the brush, but I can't give you the brush itself. Does that make sense? And there's too many things that I want to do with this, and it'll be a great place for us to start next week, okay? So let's do this. I'll figure out a way to make the creation of the brush part simpler next week. Instead of actually going through the part, we'll just go over what we've done so far, but make it a little bit easier. We'll do the modification for that part, and then we'll jump into other things. Make sense? So, say what? You can say, but it doesn't matter. We're gonna have to. We're pretty much starting from scratch next week. Okay, so the assignment. If you look really quickly, the assignment for next week. Is to again go to the form to actually introduce yourself, attach the picture, to go through setting up your workspace. You guys need to check out your own workstations. You need to check out your computers to make sure that the preferences are set correctly, to make sure specifically that those color settings are set up. If those color settings are set up falsely, everything that you do from this point on will be worthless. You can't calibrate your monitors because we have not gone through that yet. And then finally, I need you to just do a quick read through, specifically, look at the syllabus, look at the final project, right? If you don't understand any of that part, go through that part. And then you need to start looking at the course material PDFs. If there was only one PDF to read for next week, it would be the one called Color Primer. We good? Are there any questions?
No.
Okay, I'll see you guys next week. So what?
You know the brush I made?
Oh, sure.
It was like, mine was all like, separated.
Yeah, which is fine. Yeah, that's fine. Don't worry. We're going to actually, what's beginning to happen to you, we're going to amp up hugely so that it creates this kind of variety.
Okay.
So it's a good thing.